we feel that compensational offsets are only credible when used with a very robust reduction and measurement reduction in insetting strategy ahead of that.
Welcome to the GOAT Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Cassinan. At GOAT, we define sustainability through the lens of intentionality, circularity, and community. With this framework, any problem can be solved. The stories that we share, the pioneers that we talk to, show us a different way to build the future we all want to have.
We're at a pivotal moment where nuclear is needed more than ever. Let's once and for all become a circular economy.
Waste is not cost neutral. Like, it always costs your business something. So if you can get rid of that, then that's good for business as well.
There's this dissonance. We talk a really good game about protecting the ocean, but the purchase decisions that we make don't match with our espoused values.
An ideal food system revolves around relationship. Where is my food coming from? Who's growing it? How is it being grown? And why does that matter?
Thanks for being here. Let's dive into the conversation. How did you get involved in sailing? Did you grow up sailing at all, or were you just solely focused more climate?
No, a bit of both. So I grew up on an island, so on the Isle of Wight, little island off the south coast of the UK. So it was very much, not much else to do except get involved in the water in some form. And so did grow up doing a lot of sailing there, and actually on the east coast, sailing in a little place called Burnham on Crouch as well. And very much kind of family thing. Like all of my dad was sailed in the America's Cup in the 80s, and my godfather and my brother's involved in and works on boats, and so does my stepdad, and my mum is a cook for boats and stuff like that. So it's like it's all kind of a little bit, when seemed like quite a clear pathway. But I very much was more interested in the oceanography side of things, and so ocean science. And so studied oceanography at university, and but through that process, I also have really love art and creativity, and got this opportunity while I was at university to do this really cool project called Cape Farewell, where we took a bunch of us oceanographic scientists and marine biologists to the Chelsea College of Arts in London, and got a bunch of artists and scientists hanging out together and talking ocean science. And then they created these incredible works of art that's really spoke to environmental issues. And that was the first sort of eye opener for me around the kind of power of arts and later sports in terms of creating a cultural shift in a way and I think it was there's a quote, I think it was Gus Speth, that said that has sort of stuck with me, that because it was that moment that really sort of changed my perspective on what my role was in this space. Is something like, the science is now clear, or the science is clear, and it's a cultural change that we need, and us scientists don't know how to do that. That's where the kind of artists, creators, and communicators come in. And so that was a real moment of clarity for me. And then when I got the opportunity to work with Ben Ainsley Racing Team, which is America's Cup team based in Portsmouth, the British Challenge, for the America's Cup in Bermuda in 2017, that enabled me to kind of combine the two passions of sailing and sustainability. And that was my first sort of interaction with working with 11th Hour Racing, who are just the coolest group of people, who have such a fantastic mission, and then sort of growing with them across a couple of different roles over the years, and in a way to deliver on the ground against some of their passions and principles, and their mission has been super exciting.
Wow. I mean, two things that I find just so interesting about that. I mean, a lot of it, but one being, I think there's like this perception around sailing that it's like this very, closed door, extremely wealthy people just taking really expensive boats and sailing them around, and they just like to do that. And what I love is that when you get around sailing, it's not that at all. You actually have this like deep love for the ocean. You have a deep respect for the water. It's like this, it's a really cool community. And I think that's one thing that I think is very misunderstood when it comes to sailing. But then the other side of it is like the communication of the science. Like, I think when anything climate related was coming out, it was always scientists, like saying, "Hey, we need this. Here's the data. Here's the data." And people were like, "Yeah, I don't know." But I love that you were involved in the art side because that's the side that it inspires people, and it could be not even technically related to the science of ocean, but it could inspire somebody to maybe go out to the ocean. And so, where did you kind of find your footing in that? Because I mean, you're able to work with, I mean, Ben Ainsley's awesome, legendary sailor, but also like he's a huge advocate, but also what 11th Hour Racing doing is huge. So like, how'd you start to learn about that commitment from the people involved?
Well, yeah, I guess I'll kind of start with what you're saying around. I think we definitely do have an element of elitism around sailing, which does need to change, and it is starting to change. But yes, you're right. There is a community of people passionate about the ocean and passionate about making change, and who are working at all levels, from grassroots all the way up through. But we still do have a big issue with, sailing is very much can be the plaything of the wealthy white male, for a large part, and that is something that does need to change, and is starting to change. And pathways, representation, safeguarding, and things are happening across a lot of the bigger races and down to the smaller classes as well. But we need to keep pushing on that. So I think that's a key part to start with. And for us as a team, as 11th Hour Racing team, very important as well. And and well, from the kind of start of, how do we recruit people? How do we kind of get outside of our normal bubbles of recruiting our mates, and how do we get opportunities outside and bring in talent and diversity from beyond our own small bubbles is super important, because that's the way to create a winning team. Um, and also, that's a more, a space to get to where we can actually have a sport that we feel really proud of. Um, one that's inclusive and elevates all voices. And I suppose there was a few ways that we tried to address that through the team. um, One was around our kind of mentorship and education sort of internship program, another through our grantee program, so highlighting and advocating for local NGOs and projects who are working on sort of local solutions to global issues within their own communities, as we kind of went around the world. And yeah, and then so and then a sort of a couple of other ways, but the mentorship piece was quite important to us, because actually not only did that enable us to bring people from outside of our community or outside of our kind of existing bubbles into our space, but also helped us bring a youth voice into our team and create and have lots of people challenging us and challenging our kind of thought processes and strategies and things, and created a new sort of level to the project as well. So there were a couple of ways, but then yeah, and then in general, kind of how the people side of things. How do our team members are our best advocates, and so a big part of the project in the early years, or year or two especially, was around internal engagement. So we did a lot of what we called ocean hour sessions, so educational sessions on everything from biodiversity and biomimicry, using bio-inspired design and circularity, to featuring our grantee projects and highlighting those, to looking at zero waste cooking classes and all sorts of cool fun things. And then we created a curriculum off the back of that, which we captured people on during lockdown, because then they had nothing else to do, to try and teach around different topics each month, because sustainability is so broad and it means so much to so many different things to so many different people. So, covering topics, a huge range of topics, to try and sort of show that and to understand more about what each different individual within the team was interested in and passionate about, and help upskill and create sort of informed ambassadors for each of those topics was a key part.
And where did you? I mean, so 11th Hour Racing is a team that it's been around for a little while, and the Ocean Race has been around for a while. But for people that don't actually know really the sailing world, like there are people who they know kind of about the America's Cup, they kind of know SailGP, but not. And then they're like, wait, there's these people that Ocean Race. What's that? Do they just kind of sail in the ocean? What is kind of the format of the Ocean Race?
Yeah, okay. It's a very exciting race. It's basically, so this edition, there were, I think it was around 37,000 miles. There was stopovers. We started in Alicante, the team sailed from there to Cape Verde, then Cape Town, Itajaí in Brazil, Newport, Rhode Island, which is where our sponsors are based, and then Aarhus, The Hague, and finished in Genoa. And it's sort of pitched as or known as being sort of the toughest test of a team in professional sport. So they're out there over a period of sort of 6 months in total, through the Southern Ocean, really harsh conditions, in very isolated locations as well. I think there's one point where um, the sailors talk about Point Nemo, which is in the Southern Ocean, which is the sort of most isolated location where the sailors on the boat are sort of closer to astronauts in space than they are to sort of civilizations on Earth, which is quite a mad thing to think about. And what the sailors tend to get in that or feel, sort of having talked to Charlie and some of the team, is this concept called the ocean view effect, much like the astronauts above who have this overview effect where it's this kind of perspective of the planet when you get far from it, or when the sailors, when they get far, outside of land, you have this kind of overview effect, or ocean view effect, as the sailors call it, which gives you that perspective around the fragility of the ocean, the planet, and what our roles are in that space, and then trying to bring that message to shore.
Wow. Not a lot of people actually ever venture down there. I mean, it's almost like exploration at that point. I mean, what's kind of that experience to actually go down there? I mean, I mean, yes, the ocean view experience for sure, but I mean, is it just a completely different experience, view of the earth, and how does that actually, what's the experience, and I guess the impact that it has on the sailors, but and then how do they start to try to communicate that? Because sometimes you have experiences out in nature and you're like, wow, this is profound and I will remember this. But then you're like, oh, tell someone, oh, you had to have been there. And it's kind of like one of those moments. How do the sailors really try and communicate that?
Yeah, I think we're very lucky. We have some very sort of compelling storytellers amongst the team, and on shore, but backed up with the sort of comms team on the shore who tell some fantastic stories and capture that in the and so we have Amory Ross, who is our um, media crew member, who captured a lot of those incredible stories. And captured some of the raw stuff, so the mental and physical exhaustion, but also the cool projects that we have going around the ocean science as we go around. So the guys have a ocean pack on board where they're measuring temperature, salinity, water quality. And then they also release drifter buoys that feed into oceanographic and meteorological research. And then we also did a really cool eDNA project. So taking water samples and looking for traces of, and particularly for us, we were looking for the Mediterranean monk seal through eDNA that you can get from water samples, which is super cool. So this is telling kind of those stories as well at the same time, and really understanding. Amory would do a beautiful job of, in each waterway that we were sailing through, he would know all of the biodiversity, um, and the mammals that you might encounter, to be able to kind of talk through and educate the team on. So
What's that like for you as a scientist? I mean, you wanted to go into ocean background and sailing, but like, what is it like for you to, I mean, you guys are almost writing the science as you're discovering it in some of these cases.
it was super cool for me, especially because with the oceanography background, because when we were doing our research, it was tens of thousands of pounds a day to hire a research vessel to go out and do a transect, and funding and things like that. So the concept that you can have these ocean packs on recreational or performance yachts that are going around the world anyway, and capturing that data without cost to the scientists, was a really cool concept to me, that you can have almost that citizen science approach um to gathering so much more data in locations where not many research vessels are going, um, or vessels in general are going. So that was a really cool part for me to be able to kind of see.
And so, what's kind of your day to day in kind of what you do with 11th hour racing? Because I mean, it's every 4 years it's the race, and there's planning and building that goes on with it. But what is that? So there's a stage when you're actually in the race, and I'm sure you're super busy doing that. But you're also super busy when they're not racing. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah. Okay. So we went through a few phases, and the role kind of was sort of changed and morphed through that time. In the beginning, it was very much about data collection. So we were really trying to understand in a lot of detail. We feel strongly that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So how. So we did this very detailed life cycle assessment of the race boat. Alongside doing all of our operational footprints and capturing all of our sort of scope 1, 2, and 3 um, carbon footprints across everything else. But for us, the really important one was there hadn't been a sort of high resolution study done of a build of an Imoca 60 in about 10 years. So we did that really detailed study, worked with a project called Marine Shift 360, who were developing a life cycle assessment tool that was bespoke for the marine industry, um, and then use that data to inform some decision making, but also to inform policy and rules changes within the IMOCA class. So the IMOCA class now put forward, IMOCAs have to do a life cycle assessment for all new builds. There's incentives around alternative materials with a lower embodied carbon, sort of green sale rules, which stipulate sort of renewable energy use in manufacturing, capturing transport and waste impacts, and all of these rules are kind of that they will develop and become even more meaningful. And so then we had this sort of body of data to go to them and say, look, these are where the big impact hotspots are, and that helped inform those processes, which was really exciting.
I think that's like a huge part when you guys are actually building, going through at least the impact report that you guys did do, and we'll link that. It was interesting to see. I think when people build things, I think a lot of people go, well, that's the big impact, and actually the impact of you guys building yours was a lot smaller. It was actually kind of incredible to see like how small that percentage was over the overall impact. The operations ended up being, kind of the more side of it. Did that kind of shift perspective a little bit, at least in the process and how you guys approach things? Because you guys did integrate some alternative materials that actually kind of, I think, contributed to some success.
Yeah, for sure. We were definitely testing a lot of things. Yes, the our operational footprints sit at sort of between 500 and 1,000 tons a year, and the build of a boat was about 550. Then plus sort of the optimizations was another sort of 200. Um, so it was, yeah, and over a 4-year campaign, then that piece sort of reduces, and it's definitely, the focus becomes more around, optimizing your shipping and all your kind of materials purchased, and so it became really important for us to consider, what always was important for us to consider our supply chain, what we're purchasing, where we're purchasing it from, um, and that's kind of led us into one of the next project, which was the toolbox. So actually looking at, so I think scope 3, or the materials and services that we purchased, accounted for 2/3 or more of our footprint over the entire campaign. And so actually the more that we could engage our supply chain, the better, and move them along the sustainability journey, the better. And the advantage that we had by going through the LCA process is that we got to know a lot of our suppliers really well, through the data collection process, and because we were capturing everything from raw materials, manufacturing, transport locations to site where they're being assembled. Everything involved in sort of production, manufacturing, transport, and assembly. And so through that process, we realized we're working with a lot of SMEs. We're working with a lot of people that really have a lot of willingness to put in place better sustainability management, but not necessarily the knowledge on where to start, or the resources, or where to find the resources. So that's kind of when we produced the toolbox, which is a set of resources to take. Initially, was to take our suppliers through the steps, from 1 to 8 of assessing their starting point, understanding where their big risks and issues and opportunities lie, engaging their stakeholders, creating strategies, plans, reporting, um, and assessing progress and things. And then that then became something that not just our suppliers could use, but actually became something that our peers and other teams could use. And eventually, actually, we've been working more recently with the Association of National Olympic Committees, who are using it amongst their um, federations and things to help them, um, to achieve against the UNFCCC Sports for Climate Action goals, which is super cool. So it became a project, something that was actually quite useful, even more broadly. So yeah, I think that that was probably one of my favorite kind of legacy projects that's come out of it. So,
It's so cool. I mean, the toolbox is what I find amazing about the toolbox, honestly, is that it's useful. I think a lot of the solutions that are like, hey, you should do this, you should do that, companies, individuals, organizations are kind of like, I mean, that's kind of a use case over here, but we're over here, and this is our pro. And the way that you guys kind of define the toolbox, what I really like is it is you can almost copy and paste it into any organization. You can copy and paste it in almost any situation. I mean, that's kind of what we've tried to do on the sustainability side with Goat. Is we kind of try and step it back to intentionality, circularity, and community, because that's just how you approach problems. And this is very much the blueprint of how to approach life cycle assessment, because I think when you start to look at supply chains of companies, that is like, I mean, you mentioned it, that it's the biggest impact. It's also the hardest thing to kind of evaluate, because you actually need buy-in from the stakeholders the whole way through. I mean, if you get 80% of the way through and they just say no, it's kind of doesn't quite serve the purpose. Like, you're making progress, but it's not really making the movement that I think everybody wants to make. How was that process of like people who didn't have the resources or who wanted to get involved, or maybe were there suppliers that were kind of like on the fence of, hey, this is our infrastructure, this is how we got to be to work? Like, how did you guys navigate some of that? Because I think that's one of the biggest hurdles for a lot of companies. It's like, yeah, you could talk to a lot of people and they're like, yes, we want to do the right thing, but logistically, we don't want to have to lay off a bunch of people, we don't want to have to take a huge expense for our business. How do we survive?
actually, it was mostly pushing on an open door. Yes, there were some barriers, but there's been a huge change in the last, few years, 5, maybe slightly more, where you've gone from having to try and sell something in to it being the conversation being more, yeah, we get it, we want to do it, but how and with what resource? And so actually, it wasn't as hard as as it has been in the past. Also, I think there's more and more legislation coming in around, around reporting, and more sports as well, getting on the UNFCCC Sports for Climate Action framework, and and wanting to make sure that we're moving all together in the right direction. So I think it wasn't the barriers weren't necessarily around um, having to sell it in. It was more where to start, and that's I think what then the toolbox provides is your roadmap. And it's not just kind of guides, but it's also practical templates and trackers and issues matrices and all sorts of useful sort of practical things. So it's not just like, okay, I've read a bit of guidance and but I'm still really not sure where to start. There are then the practical tools to kind of run through, and surveys and things like that. So I think hopefully that helped, but you still need people to be passionate inside an organization to run with it, because still might not be their first role. It might be part of another. So yes, and I guess the what we tried to do then was create a bit of more of a working group. So we had a sustainable design and build working group, and we had that kind of support within that system. And then we also had, so the Ocean Race ran a sustainable boat build workshop group that created a lot of momentum through that. So you then all became part of something, and it was clear it was this kind of nice sort of example of collaboration across organizations that might normally be competitive. And then there was also more recently, there's the development of the Sustainable Marine Alliance, who are kind of taking a lot of that work and keeping it sort of going forward. So creating, we sort of did a big piece of work around what are the barriers and enablers across boat building and operations in this space, and came up with a set of ideas, and a lot of those have been pushed forward. So there's the creation of an alternative materials database that's started, and carbon, the World Sailing Trust are running a carbon fiber circularity alliance. So there's lots of cool things happening in this collaborative space, and the more you put in, the more you get out. So I think people are starting, or organizations are starting to see it much more as a business advantage to get involved. And so I think, yeah, it has definitely has become a lot of an easier conversation.
Nice. Yeah, and I think the material side is really fascinating because I mean I've worked with a few boat builders in the past, and the boat building process is generally like this. I mean it's an older style of doing things, and I think one of the cool things that I think the ocean race has the opportunity and has done is how do we innovate on the process and the materials. I mean, yes, circularity and carbon fiber, but I believe you guys use flax fiber, right?
We have a little bit, yeah. So we've tried all sorts of alternative materials. So we flax, not just flax sort of woven cloth, but also power ribs, which is this really cool sort of biomimicry inspired sort of grid structure, which brings sort of additional um, structural support without needing as much material, sort of mimicking a leaf vein sort of structure, which is super cool. We've also used various different types of recycled carbon and bio-based resins, recycled PET cores, and things like that. But right now, it's only 100 kilos over a sort of 8-ton boat, so it's not huge. But we've trialed it. Lots of the other teams have taken it on as well, and it's within the rule, and then that will just it's a proof of concept at that stage, which we hope now will kind of increase in uptake. Um, yeah,
Where does that line sit in terms of performance and sustainability? Because I think that's one of the, I mean, especially important things in sport. It's like at the end of the day, regardless of the sustainability goals, the goal of the race is to win it.
yeah. Well, I think you have to
And
tie them together, and
correct.
in the rule, you have to tie them together in the rules, because otherwise it is always a battle between the two. Um, and what's really exciting that the Amoka class are working on at the moment is a rule called the carbon cap, which basically is just another rule, another box rule for designers who are all ready for it. They're like, just give us the rule and we'll design and innovate within it. And so basically, so now that we've got, we know that the cap, what the footprint is of an Amoka built, a recent Amoka, we say this is the carbon cap. Design and innovate within it, and that can be, that could be maybe looking at different materials. Sure, could be one of them, taking further some of the research that we've done, or it could be looking at what processes, or it could be taking out plugs and molds, or and then each year or each sort of iteration of the rule, the cap will come down. So then you have to innovate further and then bring us back in line with global goals. So yeah, so that's quite exciting, because that fully then ties performance to sustainability, which and stops the battle.
Exactly. Well, and I think from your side, I mean, being in 11th hour racing and actually, I mean, I think it's one of the few sports that actually travels the world in a way of we'll see you on the other side, and they sail on over there. It's not just, fly to the next event. Um how does that work from a communication standpoint? I mean, you guys are meeting in all different countries. You're communicating this journey. What does it look like to actually communicate it from the team perspective? Because, I mean, the metrics that you guys had of just the actual footprint you had and the awareness that you guys raised and the data that you published, like, how does that all get to scale, and what does it look like on a global level? Because you're obviously communicating it to different audiences.
Yeah, very good point. Might be one more for our comms team. But in terms, I can speak to how we communicate it amongst our sort of peers from a supply chain and things. And I think one of the key pieces that's come out of this sort of, and developing our climate action plan, and sort of seeing all of our impacts, and where we go with it and what we take it to next, is this concept of insetting. So how do we take this footprint that we've got on this global scale, um, and yes, we can reduce it. We've done a number of different ways of reducing it and bringing that down incrementally, and then we could then jump straight to offsetting, or compensating with mangrove projects, or whatever. But actually, what's really important to us is that there's this step before, which is insetting. So if we're going to have hope of making this truly come down campaign after campaign, and have less to compensate for at the end, then we believe quite strongly in meaningful insetting projects. So how do we? So now that we've kind of done our life cycle assessments, our carbon footprinting, we know where our big impact hotspots are. It's in our supply chain. It's in the composite space. Then we did a request for proposals. So looking at where we can, invest in our value chain to help bring down the footprints of these materials. And then, so we've partnered with two projects, one called Holy and one called Lineat. And Holy work on a sort of circular carbon fiber solution where you give them your design file for your component. They'll 3D print it in one continuous fiber. You use it, then at its end of life, you give it back. They dissolve the resin off the fiber, re-spool the carbon. So you have one continuous unbroken fiber that then has properties that are much closer to virgin when you come to use it, reprint it for the next project. So we've invested in some uh, in some 3D printers for them to help bring down the footprint of their mold making activities. So then that, brings down the footprint of their materials further. And then similarly with Lineat, who are really cool, based in Bristol, they are taking the chopped strand recycled carbon that's gone through a pyrolysis process, and then they're shooting it through a water jet technology and aligning the fibers. So you then get this aligned fiber tape, recycled aligned fiber tape, which you can then use, which again sort of has properties closer to virgin than the sort of chopped strand mat, which means it's even more and more, usable. So then hopefully we can then, with this investment, then we can actually create a product, a recycled carbon product that's even more valuable for our teams and industry to then drive down the impacts of these boats in the future. So we feel like that's a really important step. And then yes, we do then do sort of compensation with blue carbon at the end, which is really important to us too. But the insetting pieces we're trying to is what we're trying to communicate about with our suppliers, with governing bodies, with others that we need to kind of really take a look at our footprints and invest in our value chains to bring them down, um, rather than hope it's just going to happen.
Is that where you think the biggest challenge is? Because I think from our perspective at least, one of the bigger challenges is a lot of companies like, well, we'll just offset it. And it's not, oh, let's re-innovate the process, we'll just pay somebody to take care of this on this side. And obviously, like, yes, you do have some validation side of the carbon offset industry or the blue carbon offset industry, so you need like trusted sources of those. But the insetting I find really interesting because it's actually trying to innovate the inputs that's going into that process to lessen the need for the offset on the other side. Is that kind of the most important focus that you see just from a science perspective that, I mean, people can really push forward on?
We do as a team for sure. Yeah, we feel that, if it's just offsets otherwise, if used in the way that you described there, it's like sort of selling your sins, like George Monbiot says, or it's very much, you're pushing your food around on your plate to give the impression you've eaten it, and you're not actually making any change. And it's just you kind of, it's great. Okay, we're a well-funded team. We'll just keep doing whatever we want to do and plant a few more trees at the end. You're not actually driving any change, and so we feel that compensation or offsets are only credible when used with a very robust reduction and inset measurement reduction and insetting strategy ahead of that. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And out of all the data, because I mean, I would imagine you got piles and piles and piles of data from this last race. What was interesting to you or surprising?
Mm. I think one piece was actually the foils, how impactful the foils are, because they're not the heavy, they're not, but based on their weight, so you kind of have a bit of an idea in your mind before you do the study where the impacts are going to lie, and actually the foils are disproportionately more impact. Um, and I think that's big. I think we kind of worked it out due to the sort of the amount of high modulus carbon used, and also the amount of wastage involved in building the foils. So that was a bit of a surprise. Um, so maybe, that could result in a limit to the amount of foils that you could purchase, or something like that to bring that down. Um, what else that was surprising? Oh, not surprising, but cool. If the entire of our supply chain, we sort of simulated if our entire supply chain had been on renewable energy, then the build would have been 30% less. So I think, one really sort of simple, for the most part, way of is just switch your energy provider. It just feels like it's an obvious one, but actually you could prove through that 30% reduction, actually you're kind of over halfway to meeting our 2030 goals if we can just get that done. And that doesn't have to impact massively people's, manufacturing processes or bottom lines, or you know. Um, what else? I think that we had 35 tons of material going into making an 8-ton boat. So, but actually, so when you consider the molds, the offcuts, so there's efficiencies that can be made, but remembering also that a lot of that is driven by the design decisions. So, around 80% of the footprint of the boat is locked in at design stage. So making sure that we're using these tools, life cycle assessment tools, as design decision making um, tools, and making sure that it's enabled by the rules is super important, because you're limited to 20. The boat builders are limited to working with 20% basically by that stage. So yeah, I think so. Those are some of the few takeaways.
And you guys were collecting data of, I mean, kind of ocean along the way too. So what was some of the data around that end?
Um, yeah. So I think the eDNA stuff was the coolest from my perspective, because um, so we
How
worked
does
with.
that work, by the way? Like, how can you actually, like, how does that technology actually work?
Okay, I'm going to butcher this because I really don't understand. It's some kind of magic where they put markers into. So you take your water sample, you have markers in, put markers in there, and then that you're looking for. Either you're looking for exactly another marker. So, for example, we were looking specifically for the monk seal, or you look for a sort of a whole code, and then you can sort of um, uh, find all sorts of different things. But the monk seal piece was quite exciting, because then you could actually, I think the organisation had been working and found some sightings and had some eDNA samples that demonstrated that the monk seals were around. So that was super cool.
Wow. And so it literally can detect from the water if the monk seal just swam right through it. That's incredible. Ah, so it's like it's actually, I mean, thinking more big scale, you can realistically see the migration patterns of almost every animal in the ocean. Because one of the things I find fascinating about the ocean is that it's so unexplored. Like we don't understand really anything about the ocean, yet we very much are a part of it. And so I always find it like, what is that world underneath? And I think we're just starting to get some of the tools to be like, how does all this work?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, I love data. I think a lot of our team do. But yeah, it enables us to, yeah, understand. And then with the understanding, we can work to address impacts, protect better, and, concentrate our resources in the best places. So
So, what does it look like now that the race is finished? You guys are going into the next campaign. I mean, people aren't going to actually see anything for years, a couple years. So, like, what does it look like for the team when you come back? Obviously, everybody takes a small vacation for sure. And then, what does it look like as you guys start to go into the next phase?
yeah, I think for us, it's very much looking at, and actually, it was a really good process through writing our impact report. It was the ability to look back and take stock and actually see what worked, what didn't, what challenges there were, and what opportunities that we missed, what we do differently. And actually, we came to this big realization as going through when we were going through that process, that we've made a bunch of these incremental changes and these tiny sort of, reductions and improvements, but actually we need a paradigm shift. We can't, we're not going to get to 50% reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050, or equity, or all of our other kind of targets, if we don't have a complete paradigm shift in how we approach the sailing world industry in general. So for us, the next stage is trying to really take a step back, think outside of the box, and understand like what paradigm shifts could work best for our industry and our world, and how can we make that happen within our space. So whether it's the sort of ecocentric versus ecocentric model, or access over ownership sharing economy, or yeah, what systems thinking, what is it that what is going to work for us best, and how can we then kind of drive that and apply that to what we're doing in a more holistic way, rather than, what is the quote, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We want to kind of have a break point, and then really reconsider how we approach these things from a completely different perspective. So that's the exciting work that we've got next.
Why is it important to you? I mean, I think I mean, yes, it's important. Don't get me wrong, but you technically don't have to. So why is it important to you to actually shift the paradigm, to change things, to drive things forward? Why does it matter for you as a person?
For me personally, because we've got such an opportunity with sports. Back to kind of what I was saying in the beginning about being this beacon of cultural change, and we've got all of these great attributes as a sports team where we can, move quite fast. We can move. We're not sort of hampered by loads of regulation or legislation, or we're not a big corporate company. We can do things quickly. We can test stuff. We've got access to resources um, and access to sort of this platform. So I think we if the reason it's important to me is because we need to be not just speaking about, not just raising awareness, but showcasing solutions and demonstrating change, in the hope that that can, that and through collaborations and through sort of through all of these types of projects, we can work together with others and sort of increase uptake throughout our industry and hopefully beyond. Because to be proud of our sport, we need to be kind of walking the walk. So I think that's why it's important for me is yeah, we've got this a huge responsibility with the platform that we've got.
Hmm. Well, and when you start to look at the impact that you guys do have, and actually really how fast you guys can showcase things, I think that's one of the more exciting things. Your feedback loop is so much shorter, which I think is really cool. Is that what kind of keeps you going, at least in the science side and the sports side, is the fact that that feedback loop is so short? Because I think sometimes the fear for a lot of people is that they might be wrong. So they go after something that they think is going to be good and they're wrong, and they're like, "Man, why continue to do it? Is it okay to be wrong?"
Yeah, for sure, and that's what Damien. I was smiling because that's exactly what Damien, who's our sustainability program manager, always sort of tells us. I'm the more cautious one, always like worried, about everything or whether we should, go forwards. Damien's like, no, we what's the phrase? I'd rather you crack on and do something and make a mistake than sit in paralysis and don't take opportunities and make things happen. So, and that's the reason why we've got the projects that we've got running now, is because we kind of push forwards and we're like, let's just try and make this happen and make this work, and supported by the faith and sort of advocacy of great sponsors who enable us to do that and give us the resources to be able to do that. We had a team of three sustainability people within a team of 30, and it's so we had the resource to be able to, and we had the trust to be able to run with our ideas and sort of test stuff, break stuff, make stuff happen, and give it a go. And yeah, I think Damien always says, yeah, perfection is the enemy of action. So that was definitely a shift that I had to kind of get comfortable with, which has been the reason that we've managed to get so much stuff done, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think the intention to always make progress is so important. And but I mean, this time in history, I think human history, science history, I mean, we're in one of the most exciting times of things are accelerated at an exponential rate of the ability to solve problems. Um, but also that can lead to, there are so many solutions that there's not really like a there it's easy to latch on to just one and say let's go for it, but all of the solutions are actually on the table, and I think it's about testing and seeing rather than going all in. I mean, I think one of the things that we talk about on the Go platform, which is like slightly controversial, is like plastic's not actually bad. It was, we didn't think about how it was actually going to be used in a life cycle back when we did it. And so it's like, how do we then put this mindset into what we go with going forward? And I love that you guys do it that way, because it's showcasing that, like, it's okay, we're going to adapt, we're going to pivot, but we're always pursuing something. And I think that the public can get on with that, because I think one of the big challenges, the public goes, well, if it doesn't work, then why am I going to keep, putting investment, time, support to it if it's maybe not even going to be possible? I'm just going to stick with what I know works.
Well, and for me, it's not even just about one solution to hitch your ride to. It's a portfolio of solutions, because different things are going to work in different places with different communities with different projects and stakeholders. So yeah, I don't think there is ever going to be one size fits all. It's got to be a set of solutions that are fit for purpose.
Mhm. Oh, so do you get time to spend in the ocean now that you're older and immersed in it? Do you still get to spend time with the ocean?
Yeah, more recently, well, yeah, love we actually all the way around the world managed to take time to do get in the sea at some point during the and actually Aarhus was the best because it was cold water and we'd go every day at midday and dunk and then refresh and then ready to go again. I think it's yeah, it was just such a perfect way of keeping focused and taking some time out. But yeah, more recently back and live in South Sea by the beach, so in Portsmouth, and got into wing foiling in a very unconvincing way. So that's been quite fun to try.
I haven't had the courage to start it yet. I've seen way too many moths just pitch pull right into the water. Was that the experience when you first started?
Yeah, I went in with all too much confidence and yeah, and it was yeah, 30 knots and on breaking waves and trying to power through it and yeah, but getting some lessons now, so hopefully the learning curve is gonna improve.
Oh my gosh. Well, how do you stay, kind of focused? At least, how do you balance out your life? Because obviously, like when you have so much that you're juggling, so much that you're doing, so much responsibility and research, how do you kind of balance your time, your just day to day? Where do you find your balance?
Um, I think my balance is in the fact that I'm doing something that I love, and so my kind of the the sort of I don't know, the kind of the balance comes from the fact that I'm surrounded by a team that really care about each other, and that you've got sort of support from your peers, and um, and that you're all working towards something that you really believe in. So I think that kind of I'm quite lucky in that I get a lot of balance from work and and also the fact that I love this kind of intense team atmosphere where you're pulling together to make something happen because it's the same on the water as it is with the sort of the sustainability side of things. You're kind of pulling together in the same way, and and so that kind of gives me a lot more motivation, and so I get a lot of that balance from the team that I work with in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, I would imagine it's pretty grounded in how everybody operates. Because I mean, I would say it's one of the few places where stress and high stress, more specifically, is kind of par for the course. It's just normal. I mean, especially Southern Ocean stuff. I mean, it's terrifying type of scenarios for a lot of people, and yet to perform at a high level, it's got to be calm. Is that kind of a from a mental health perspective? Is that just like a really high performance way of thinking? And how can people really start to apply that in their everyday if they're like, oh, well, I'm not going to the Southern Ocean. Like I never would, to be honest. Like overnight in a boat, I probably wouldn't be too, like, I love sailing, but man, way out in the ocean and below deck, I'm not feeling too good. So like, how does it work for people who maybe can't relate to the lifestyle of like high performance, that side?
Yeah, I think for me it's just like being by the beach here, and I'm lucky to be able to have access to the ocean here. Just being able to get out and see a horizon for me is something that is incredibly mind clearing and almost meditative. So yes, I think for me, it's definitely passionate about creating spaces, nature, whether it's nature or oceans specifically, that are accessible for sure, and being able to share that and the sailors I'm sure feel it when you're looking out over open ocean and you've got the albatross or you've got whatever it might be that is that beautiful moment of calm is what we want to be able to share and allow other people to experience. So yeah, for me, being able to get in the sea, get my head under the water, almost dissolves all stresses um, and anxieties, and enables me to then completely have a reset. So yeah, and I think nature in general has that incredible capability and fantastic, um, qualities for helping us all with our mental health, and being able to share that and allow other people to have access to it is important.
Yeah, that's something I haven't been able to truly figure out why, like actually why. But there is something about, yeah, being immersed in nature, and it is a natural reset. I mean, whether it's high performance or running a startup, or you're just in a really stressful job, or just stressed in life, the walk outside, the dip in the water, the time in the forest, even the time gardening, there's something about that connection that I don't know if we've really explored in a way that is tangible, besides going out there and doing it, and being present with it too. I think sometimes people will be like, I'm going to go out in nature, and then they just, go on a quick walk, continue the stress, be like, that didn't work. But if you really like kind of let go of it and just enjoy that, it helps so much. Yeah. And so is sailing kind of one of those things that you see being a huge tool for sustainability going forward? I kind of see sailing has always been this, at least this thing in my mind is something that, you have people who explore, of course, sailing, they sail around the world. You have the racing side of things. You have youth sailing, which I think is one of those really huge components. I feel like there was a generation and a half there that literally didn't even know what no access to sailing. But I think to me, like whenever I'm out on a boat, you don't have your phone because you just don't. You're completely just you're sailing and you're using the wind. You get this weird, you're in tune with, it's almost like a mindless in tune with the wind. You know exactly the direction, you know how the waves are hitting. You just kind of are connected with it. Do you see sailing as being a piece of how to get people more involved in sustainability outside of just we're racing and we're doing a life cycle assessment?
Yeah, for sure. I think sailing, I think other sports, music for me has that same effect where you're kind of disconnecting from your kind of whirring mind and concentrating on something completely different. So yeah, playing music, arts, sailing for sure has this capacity to not only teach us about ourselves, connect us with nature, connect us with sustainability, but also um yeah, just to kind of it teaches us all sorts of things from teamwork to, leadership to all sorts. I think there's so many great benefits that sailing can bring to us. But in it, so can arts and other sports and music and things as well.
Well, and speaking of art, the design of 11th Hour, like the sail, the boat, what's the story behind that? Because it is so, honestly, it's so cool.
Yeah, it is beautiful. So yeah, so that was driven by our sponsors, and they wanted to really have this billboard that showcased what we were about. And so they went through a long process of sort of creating concepts around how we can speak ocean health through the billboard of the boat. We could have just put a big logo on the side and but maybe people wouldn't have connected with that as well or understood what it meant. And so we wanted to really or 11th hour wanted to really kind of tell the story of what their organization is about and around creating this connection with nature through so they ended up working with twins called the Van Ortons to take the concepts of their mission and create something really beautiful, and we love how it came out. It's such a great colorful, beautiful, engaging, and you can look at it forever and see something different, which I love as well.
I find that so cool because I think one of the hardest things about sustainability is that inspirational art side of it. How do you make it exciting? How do you make it fun? How do you make it engaging for people to just look at who maybe aren't interested in it at the moment? How do you get them to look at it just a little bit longer? And then you dive a little bit more into the science side of things. I think that the art side is fascinating to me. Why has it been so important for you? I mean, you mentioned music, ocean. I mean, is art kind of a side? Because most what I find fascinating about, honestly, I've met quite a few scientists at this point, and for some reason, and I don't understand why, most scientists that I meet are also like, oh, I am a musician, or I do this other wildly like non-analytical thing. What is it about that?
Yeah, I think because it's back to this cultural shifts piece, it captures your imagination in a way that a pie chart on a report can't, and there was another one, and they stick with me. So, for example, there's this great project called what was it called? Which was basically a bunch of oceanographic scientists went and took some flow meters, put them in the river in a river in London that had been sort of built over the top of, so you couldn't actually see where the river flows, but it's underneath. They put the sensors in it, and then the musicians played the flow of the river that had been built over the top of. So and then those kind of things just stick with you, and those ways using art and music and sport, the billboard of the boat to tell stories is such a more compelling way than maybe my impact report. Although I do think the impact report is quite cool, and it's animated, and we tried to make it as creative as possible. But you can capture hearts and minds in a different way through compelling storytelling, through the art on the boat, and through projects like that.
Do you think it helps your scientific research? Like coming at things with more of an artist mindset? Do you think it helps like how you approach science? Yeah. I think that's so cool. It's one of those areas where I think it's an exciting opportunity in not just like climate, but really just culture. How do we integrate this idea of almost like a curiosity? And I think it gets people curious about the world around them, and that's what makes it exciting. And the way that people see it is all different. But I think when you look at the side of the boat, when you see the way you guys actually represent what you guys do, it's it's all about it's really about one mission. You guys are going after something and all have a belief on it, all different backgrounds, all different areas, travel the world, yet everybody can kind of get around this one singular idea. And I just find that fascinating.
Yeah, no, I love that that's your takeaway from it, because that that was the intention for sure.
Wow. And so what are the goals for the next campaign? I mean, is it that reduction of the 30%? Is it kind of trying to innovate new materials? Is it all of the above? I mean, what's really how can you push the envelope going forward?
For us, it's starting from that paradigm shift. So before getting into the detail of what any of those kind of smaller projects look like, or how they contribute, it's looking at what's the big picture and how can we drive change from a sort of systems level, and then what does a project or a campaign look like within that. So watch this space.
Nice. And then where's your favorite place to enjoy nature on the planet?
On the planet. Um, Right now, probably Eastney Beach, just down the road here, which is a lovely, like, wild bit of the beach where there's lots of sea cabbages growing out of the stones, and that go red at different times of the year, and it's cold, but it's 5 minutes from my house, and so I love it.
That's amazing. And if you could tell somebody one thing um that they could maybe take out of at least our conversation, but just with your background as a scientist in the ocean and everything the ocean race does and 11th hour racing, what would be something you would tell somebody to just do?
I think that we need to. I think there's a lot of anxiety. A lot of it, we all have a lot of environmental anxiety and everything else. Um, and as individuals, sure, there's individual things that we can do at home, but the majority of the impacts are created by a few big companies. So I feel like the biggest takeaway that we can have is to remember that, yes, we are individuals, but we're also part of organizations. And so, can we take our influence to the organizations that we work within, and can we take the toolbox, for example, to our organizations and say, look, we want better sustainability management. Here's a set of resources that we can do it with. It's free, it's open access, it's on the Creative Commons, and there's a whole community that sits behind it that are improving it and using it and creating case studies. And so I think, yeah, for us, I often feel like telling people there's individual things that they can do can only increase our anxiety because we think it's all on us. But actually, take it to work and take it to the organizations that we're working within, have influence there, and take the toolbox there is would be my sort of takeaway.
Nice. And I also call it like a almost like a patient urgency. It's like yes, there's an urgency around it, but it's also be patient with the process, because I think when you step back and you see like, okay, there's a way that we can approach this from a mindful approach, and I think the toolbox really speaks to that. Um, it allows it to not be as anxiety inducing when you're like, oh, we got to do this, we got to do that, or else. I think that's kind of been the narrative, has been very much fear based, and it's kind of like, no, this is actually like an exciting opportunity to shift things. And if we're mindfully patient but also positive and enthusiastic about it, it then just becomes almost this like, I don't know, almost like a primary school project where you're just like, oh, well, it could be anything. We could do anything with this. It's a blank canvas.
And I like, so have you the Futera paper, the Sell the Sizzle, which is basically sell this exciting idea of a low carbon future, and people are going to be excited to get on board and contribute to that, as opposed to sort of selling the doom and gloom and fire and hell. But actually, there's an exciting future here that we can all contribute to and lend our creativity and our superpowers to. So let's do that.
Amazing. Well, Amy, I wanted to just say thank you for everything you do with 11th Hour. Your impact report is honestly one of the best ones I've ever seen. I'm probably one of the few that actually go through impact reports where most people don't. But the way you approached it and the data you guys collected and how you show it, and then the toolbox that came out of that. I mean, your work is awesome, and just what you're able to do in the industry, the impact that I know you're going to have, and already have is incredible. So just thank you for taking the time and really doing what you do. I think it's so cool that you were born to a family around sailing, and you've been able to take that to and write your own story around it with your own interests, and it's making this impact that's going to be far, far and beyond outside of sailing.
Oh, thank you. And it's definitely whole team, sponsors, partners, peers, and all of our community effort for sure. Which hopefully is reflected in the report as well, kind of showcasing how everyone else has sort of stepped up and come on board and joined us.
Thank you so much for listening to the GOAT podcast. You are the reason why we exist and why we show up every single day.
I've spent too many years being against stuff, and I've found now that it's a little bit easier and a little bit more fun to be for something.
How are we going to power the world? How are we going to build the world? How are we going to feed the world?
Company isn't just good or bad, black or white. Usually there's a lot more there, a lot more that they don't know.
It's actually about what you do in your daily life every day can make a huge difference.
Give this episode a share. Join our GOAT community, but most importantly, go spend some time in nature, because you might find it a meaningful reminder of the amazing place that we get to call home. I'm Steve Cassingham, and we'll see you next time.